two Russian ballistic missiles destroyed a Ukrainian military school. 50 people were killed, including several Polish instructors at the school, and 200 people were injured. Is a military school a legitimate military target, even if it's in a civilian area?
Oh, absolutely. This was a place where they were training Ukrainian officers and senior NCOs to operate weapon systems and aircraft. So you're killing off the seed corn of any future operation. That's definitely something that you want to do.
At the same time, or shortly thereafter, President Zelensky, who is not lawfully in office, as we all know, but who has remained in power, has either fired or asked for and received the resignation of a substantial number of his cabinet, including his rather well-respected foreign minister. What's the significance of this, Colonel?
Well, I don't know how well-respected Kuleba is. He's been a mouthpiece for, innumerable lies and misinterpretations and fictions. I think the fact that Kuleba has submitted his papers indicates that the ship is sinking. Someone said to me, if you look at the various ministers that are there, most of them have been there from the beginning, but not all. And for them to resign at this point, you can't help but reach the conclusion that the ship is sinking. If we could, Judge, I'd like to go back to this Poltava incident for just a minute.
Sure.
I think there are a couple of things that are very important about what happened. It's not just the selection of the target. In all wars, people do this. Yamamoto, when he developed the plan to attack Pearl Harbor, the main goal of the plan was to kill as many of the United States Navy's officers as possible, because he said that's the only way Japan has a chance to win, because it takes years to train a naval officer. Well, I think you had the same mentality on the Russian side, but there's something else. Poltava was the site of a very titanic battle involving Russia and Sweden in a bid for dominance of Eastern and Northeastern Europe. The Swedes lost under Charles XII. They were virtually annihilated. So Poltava figures prominently in Russian history. Second thing, it was also the site of Hitler's advanced command post during World War II from 1941, mid to late 1941, and certainly until the beginning of 43 or mid 43. So you can't overlook that symbolism if you're a Russian. Finally, these Iskander missiles that were used, they fly at roughly 4,500 miles per hour. These are hypersonic missiles. They carry a 1,500-pound warhead. They have various kinds. I don't know what they used, if this was just high explosive.
Can they be intercepted?
No, absolutely not. You can't shoot down a hypersonic missile at this point. That was my other argument. And finally, we have a lot of evidence that suggested for the first time in the war that Putin has directed that officers, commanders on the tactical level, that is brigade, because remember the Russian brigades, they have different kinds. Some are quite large, others are smaller, but they're commanded by generals. That the general who commands a brigade now has the authority to request and release and get the use of an Iskander missile. Up until this point, for Iskander ballistic missiles, which are very deadly and very, 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 very hard to deal with because they're mobile, has been in the hands of higher commanders, at least at the Army and front levels, or what we would call almost theater. Now, suddenly, a general commanding a brigade-sized formation can employ this weapon as he sees fit. That's a dramatic change. And I think the big signal is, look, we're playing for keeps now. No more nonsense. We're coming, and we know exactly where you are, because there were, as I recollect, 3 Swedish officers who had come on board down at Poltava to teach people about the use of their form of airborne warning and control systems, and they were killed. So I think there was also a message here for the Swedes. You want to join NATO? Welcome to the party.
Just as an aside, does the United States have the equivalent of an Iskander?
Not that I'm aware of.
Sounds like a terrific or horrific, depending upon whether you're on the sending or receiving end, type of weapon. Colonel, is it your understanding of the Russian mentality in 2024 that fighting a battle to commemorate something that happened hundreds of years ago is significant?
Oh, absolutely. The Russians, most Europeans, frankly, anybody who's lived in Europe for any length of time, most Europeans know their history. This is bound up with their national identity. Now, of course, there's been a big effort in Western Europe to destroy national identities, we all know. But I don't think it's succeeded. And certainly in Eastern Europe, it's an impossibility. So when you mention something like Poltava, everybody who is a Russian, and for that matter, Ukrainian, knows what that means. The 1709 battle, Hitler's headquarters, which was eventually, as we know, overrun when the Soviets finally advanced to the West. So this has symbolic meaning on many levels, but the real message is we're coming for you. It's over now. And I think that's what we're going to see more of in the near future.
Well, how much longer can Ukraine last? And if I were to give a snarky answer, I might say at least until November 6th. But is that a realistic answer also, Colonel?
Well, that decision lies in Russian hands. And I think most people that consider themselves to be Kremlinologists, I'm not one of them. I don't pretend to know what happens on a daily basis in the Kremlin, but there are people out there who are making the case, and I think John Helmer is one of them, who says that Putin is now under enormous pressure from the Russian public, from his own inner circle, from the parliament, from the various political figures, oligarchs in the country, to get this war over with once and for all. And I think we're going to see some movement in that direction. Does it happen before November? I'd frankly be surprised if it didn't. I would think that by November, this thing really ought to be at an end, at least insofar as Zelensky and his regime are concerned. Zelensky should certainly be gone by then. But, I've been wrong before, and Putin has always been the individual who wanted a reconciliation with the West, who wanted peace with the West. He was always the one exercising restraint. I think it's much harder now since the Ukrainians have been attacking civilian targets in Russia. That's intolerable.
President Zelensky has boasted about the capture of 500 square miles in Kursk. Andy has boasted that this has produced an exchange of prisoners because he's captured Russian prisoners. Are either of these boasts of any military significance, or is Kursk just a pimple?
Well, if you want an analogy, you're from New Jersey. You know the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, correct?
Yes.
Well, the Pine Barrens, for the audience, this is a desolate area of, hundreds of square miles of woods. Getting in there and coming out again is a challenge in and of itself. There aren't very many roads. The roads that go through there are blacktop, and they go from Philadelphia to Atlantic City or north or something. This is like you or I getting into a Jeep, driving into the Pine Barrens, and then announcing to the world that we've conquered the Pine Barrens.
Right.
That's the oblast of Kursk is just endless dense forests, swamps, woods.
The only thing
hills.
of significance that I know of in the Pinelands, and you may have been there, is Fort Dix. That's about it.
Yeah. Fort Lost in the Pine Barrens. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
Right. All right.
So
there's the real estate isn't worth much, and the PR advantage to this, even though Zelensky keeps pushing it, seems to have faded because other events have come to the top of the fold.
Well, the only thing he achieved was to take some of the best forces he had left with the best equipment he had at his disposal to essentially launch a PR stunt. Most of those troops are either killed or wounded. They're trying desperately to get back to Ukraine, but they're caught. They're in little pockets of perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 each along the main highway that goes to Kursk. This thing is a disaster for Ukraine. It was entirely ill-advised. I've heard it called the Cavoli plan. I hope that's not true, because if General Cavoli is responsible for this, that reinforces my low opinion of the senior leadership in the U.S. military. No one in their right mind would have sent these Ukrainians on that wild goose chase. And remember, elsewhere, things are falling apart, and the Russians continue to advance. The only thing holding the Russians back, in my judgment right now, is President Putin.